Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Radical Candor Podcast. I'm Kim Scott, co-founder of Radical Candor and author of Radical Candor and Just Work.
I'm Jason Rosoff, CEO and co-founder of Radical Candor.
And I'm Amy Sandler, your host for the Radical Candor Podcast. And today we're going to talk about an issue, Kim, you have written about extensively, our dear friend, Ruinous empathy. If you're a longtime listener or have read Radical Candor, then you're likely familiar with Kim's Bob story. And if you're not, we'll put a version of it in the show notes for you. Ruinous empathy, which is being nice, that's in quotes, but ultimately unhelpful and unkind. It's rampant among new managers. And by the way, not just new managers. I think it's just rampant.
It's just rampant.
It's rampant. Including a new manager who wrote to us asking for advice about how to break out of a ruinous empathy rut. You might want to say that 5 times faster, ruinous empathy rut. We do edit these submissions to remove any identifying characteristics. So all you need to know is that the person whose letter we're going to read, all they ever dreamed about was being a boss. And now realizes it's nothing like they imagined. So this person writes, quote, "When I recently transitioned to a dream job where I'm a manager, my obsession became commitment to taking matters into my own hands to foster cultural change. But I've never been the boss before, and I feel like a teenager testing out my new voice and observing it coming out awkwardly, and at times not aligned with the situation."
I feel their pain.
They go on to explain, "While I joined this organization amidst massive changes, I have experience with well-structured organization processes and change management, and I'm also deeply committed to the people. Upon joining, I was quick to establish meaningful relationships with my staff. I have a positive relationship with all of them except one, who has been with the organization for over a decade. Other than the founder/CEO, this person is the longest employee, and their relationship is clouded by this devotion fidelity that is hurting the organization."
Yes, that is very, sorry to interrupt, but that is it's a weird source of power, tenure. And this happens. Okay, proceed. Sorry.
Okay. No, it's great. I love the little color commentary here. So our questioner writes again, they're stuck at the time. So this person who they're having a problem with, they're stuck at the time when this organization was a small operation, when manual work was possible. We've grown so much that now they're overwhelmed and hyperventilate during our one-on-ones as I ask questions. They're so resistant to any change in process, even when it will benefit them directly. So I asked this person to meet to discuss their workload so we could find ways to manage it. They got angry and offended. I'm positive they've been failed by the system and the organization, left alone to build processes that fit in their way of doing the work, but not centered on the organization or other employees' needs. When I concluded that they're no longer the right person for the job and consulted a peer leader, they told me this person cannot be fired. Jason, pick it up from here.
Before I even get started, I just want to say I don't even think we've gotten to the depth of this person's troubles, and I already feel incredibly sad for both them and the employee. Mm-hmm. Okay, so they continue. A couple of days ago, we met for our regularly scheduled one-on-one. They had pushed back all my attempts to that point to offer Radical Candor. I made sure to be compassionate, noting that I know they are overwhelmed and care for the organization to the detriment of their own health, and that they need to be well in order to perform well at their work. I brought up the need to share their workload with the newly hired staff, questioned why they are consistently refusing help from others. After an intense emotional conversation, they told me they need kindness and space from me. Kindness and space. Inside, I was furious because that is me being kind and trying to give them space. But I said nothing. Instead, I told them how excited I was to support their redistributing their workload. 2 days later, they failed to attend a meeting for a project they're leading that the team and I spent hours preparing for. Not only that, they deleted the appointment from their calendar, and they said they never received it. Again, furious.
How did they know they deleted the meeting?
This is a detail that we may need to plumb. We need to plumb the depths.
I feel like there's a little bit of a murder mystery intrigue here with some of the details.
Bit of that vibe. Again, furious, I couldn't bring myself to say anything. A few hours later, they show up for a walk we'd planned a few days earlier, stating they just want us to share some quality time together. Because it's raining, we walk into the lounge room. They know I teach mindfulness and ask me to guide a meditation practice. I say how much I notice they need that, and I start leading the meditation. Kim, bring us home.
All right. First of all, I just want to say, again, I feel for both of these people. This is hard. This is a hard situation. Okay, on my way home, I was pissed at them for lying. But what was the lie?
Maybe about the meeting calendar being deleted.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But later, I realized I'm angry at myself for saying nothing day after day, for realizing the organization failed them, protecting their feelings instead of giving true guidance about their performance, and that I too have fallen on the same pattern and practice. I arrived at home in tears, overwhelmed by my ruinous empathy. I'm letting their feelings of overwhelm guide my approach by trying to be respectful of their time, and I'm actually hurting them even more. It's also not fair to the rest of the team. It's 5:30 a.m., and I've been up for over an hour crafting this email and thinking through all the missed opportunities to be the kick-ass boss I long to be. I need help. How do I get out of this ruinous empathy pattern? I'm so sorry. Whoever this is, I'm really sorry this is happening. This is really hard. And I think part of the problem here is that very often in organizations, at least where, especially in sort of startups that have been successful, that are now no longer startups, they've been going for, in this case, sounds like over a decade. Some of those early people have this unwritten, unspoken, unchallengeable power. And it's a power that hurts the employees and the organizations. And I think that's part of the problem here. I don't know. What do you all think?
I certainly think is it the ethos of that? There's something about the idea that people who have been there for a long time have a certain amount of authority imbued in them. And I think, we don't have the whole story here. So it might be the case that some people feel that way and other people don't. One of the things that I was wondering as I was reading this was whether they had actually talked to the CEO. Since there's a connection, they know that there's some connection there. I feel like as this person's manager, knowing that they have this relationship, it would be valuable to get the CEO's perspective. I wouldn't walk into the CEO's office and say, I'm planning to fire this person. Yes. Tell me why I shouldn't. Yeah. But I might say...
Well, Jason, I'm really curious. What exactly would you say? Because I do think we get this question a lot, because I know one of the things, even though it was about ruinous empathy, where in this letter there were moments of manipulative insincerity and how both of those things were happening. How do you think about a conversation like that, where you're going to someone who is the leader of an organization about an employee, and you're doing it from the spirit of being helpful rather than manipulative insincerity? Like maybe specifically in this case, but how do you think about that writ large? Because I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with.
Well, let's generalize from the specific. I think in this case, I would go to the CEO and say, hey, I know you hired me to run this team, and I'm having a hard time with one of the team members who I know has been here for a long time. I know that you know them, and I want to get your advice on how to handle it. Mm-hmm. That's how I'd open that conversation.
I think maybe before having that conversation with the CEO, it might make sense to back up a little bit and sort of return to the order of operations and start by soliciting feedback rather than giving it to the employee. I think for me, at least, one of the dangers of ruinous empathy is that, I care about the person, so I'm not saying this thing is really bothering me. And then because I haven't said anything, it gets a little worse. And then it's bothering me a little bit more. And so it's building and building. And then it happens again. And I don't say the thing because I care about the person and I don't want to be quote unquote mean. And then it happens a third time. And now my irritation is growing exponentially with each repetition of the problem. And I now no longer can remember any of the things I appreciate about working with this person. I can't sort of stand the person. And it's impossible for me to believe that I have done anything that might be contributing to the situation. I'm not saying that's what's going on for this reader, but I'm sort of explaining why there's this order of operations. I mean, for this writer, I guess. And so what I would recommend is start by sitting down with this person and saying, it seems like the situation has gotten really stressful. What could I do or stop doing that would help? Like ask the employee what's going on from their perspective and what you as their manager might be doing that's contributing to the situation. Because it's possible. I mean, a million things are possible. I have no idea what is going on, but it could be that this person really wanted the job and didn't get it. It could be that this person is having some issue in their personal life that has nothing to do with work that would be useful to know about. It could be that the new manager is, for whatever reason, pissing this employee off in a way that they find very stressful. And it may have, it may have everything to do with the behavior of the new manager, or may have nothing to do. It may be that this person has authority issues and can't stand having a boss. Who knows? But I think the important thing to do is to start by soliciting feedback from this person rather than giving it. And it's hard because when you've been stuck in ruinous empathy, all you're thinking about is this thing that you should have said that you haven't said.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say about soliciting feedback in the order of operations. The line that leapt out in me, there were a bunch, and Jason, I think you highlighted it as well. After an intense emotional conversation, they told me they need kindness and space from me. Inside, I was furious because that's me being kind and trying to give them space, but I said nothing. So this was, a moment where there was perhaps some manipulative insincerity going on. What I'm really curious about,
or perhaps ruinous empathy. I mean,
right? We don't know.
Yeah.
But I think they're managing their emotions. Only that person, and I feel so much care from this person writing. They spend an hour just sharing it with us, let alone how much time is coming up for them. What I'm really curious about as a go-to question that I would be wanting to know is, what does kindness and space look like for this other person? Because from the writer's perspective, they're doing all these things from a place of trying to be kind and giving space. And so, at least for me, that's a way in that I would be getting curious about. Jason, from what you heard is Kim's question around, how can we work better together, or what am I doing? Is there a question that you would start with? Kindness, space, something else?
I think all of this is like useful advice, and it is important to acknowledge that, at least from their perspective, this is only happening with one person on their team. This person is feeling frustrated, and if they're right about some of the behavior that the team member is showing, I think it's right to feel frustrated. I think it's important to acknowledge that. The reason why I think it's useful to seek advice from other people in those situations, as opposed to just going back in and soliciting feedback from the person, is this person is at least according to their retelling, has already proven themselves to be willing to sort of manipulate a situation to put their boss and their team at a disadvantage, to not show up or cancel a meeting at the last minute, to change the agenda of a meeting at the last minute. They've done a couple of things in here where it's like, I'm acknowledging that I'd be worried about jumping back into the fray with soliciting feedback, because maybe other information available to you and another way to get it. I do think that to move forward, you have to sort of reset the conversation. When Brandy was writing a response to this, she also suggested the idea of another way into the soliciting feedback would be, help me understand, sort of like a career conversation type approach. Help me understand, what are your goals here? What is it that you want to do? And how can I help you accomplish those things? I think that reset is necessary with that person. I wonder if getting an input or advice from somebody else who knows this person would also be helpful.
Yes. I mean, and I think the other question of the CEO is, am I able to fire this person or not? You need to know where your degrees of freedom. And it is possible that the person cannot be fired.
Yes, exactly.
That happens. And it's okay, actually. You can still use radical candor. In fact, radical candor is your only tool when the person cannot be fired.
So, Kim, are you okay with, from back to the order of operations, from what Jason was saying about actually we've gone to the well a few times, and at this point it might be helpful to get a different perspective?
It's not clear to me that this person has solicited feedback from the employee. So I would do that first, and I would also talk to the CEO and get some advice. I think this person presumably does not report directly to the CEO, so it should be okay. That's not like talking behind this person's back. I think you're getting advice from your boss about management problems. So that seems in the spirit of radical candor. It's not backstabbing, I don't think, but I don't know. What do you all think?
That was my question, is when you're going to someone and when that seems like you're doing it in the spirit of having a helpful conversation, being a better thought partner. But yeah, we don't know. It just says the longest employee and their relationship is clouded by this devotion, fidelity that is hurting the organization. The way it's written, it's not clear to me if it's the founder CEO's relationship with this person is clouding their perspective, or if it's, I don't know how you read that, but to me it could be that maybe the CEO might have a soft spot perhaps for this person because of their long tenure.
But that's also good to know. I mean, I think, in other words, what the question I was asking is, would going to the CEO and asking about how to manage this person violate the terms of clean escalation? And my answer to that is no, it wouldn't, because the clean escalation means if you have a peer, don't go talk to the boss that you share about this person. Then you need to go together. But this person is working for the manager who wrote in.
Yep.
And so I think it's the reason why you have a boss is to get help with these kinds of situations. One of the reasons you have a boss is to get help with these kinds of situations. So I think it's totally fine to go ask your boss for help with managing one of your employees. That's the nuance I was trying to poke on. But I want to make sure that Amy, you and Jason agree.
Oh, yeah. No, I think that makes sense. I'm curious, because we didn't talk about it except while we were reading, with the case of the missing calendar invite. And so I'm curious, at what point, if when, do you bring that up, or is that a soliciting feedback conversation? Jason, what's your take on that nugget in the letter?
I think that that's like a good thing to be aware of. It's also a very thorny thing to try to like litigate, if for lack of a better word. Like, I don't think you're ever going to be able to prove that actually happened. And so I don't think it's worth spending a bunch of time on that. I do think that the way that they described it makes it seem like even if there wasn't a calendar invite, that there was at least awareness that a meeting was supposed to happen. And so something happened where the meeting never appeared on the calendar. Like, if from their perspective, what happened was the meeting didn't appear on the calendar, that might be useful to try to understand how they could have been clearer about when the meeting was happening or something like that. Because unless the soliciting feedback conversation goes really, really well and it reveals the sort of like what is underlying this, I suspect it's going to be incumbent on this manager to be very clear with the person when they are expected to do something and where they're expected to do it and things like that. Because a mix-up of that magnitude is it's not trivial, I guess is what I would say.
I think if you feel like someone is lying, that's a really tricky situation. And so what I would be inclined to do, but maybe this is itself ruinous empathy, so tell me. But what I would be inclined to do is to say, hey, I sent you, this was on your calendar. You were invited, you're in the calendar. If it got deleted, only you would have deleted it, right? What happened? So I would, rather than saying, I think you're lying, I would ask what happened. And then I would get a sense of whether the person, has a reasonable explanation or doesn't.
So I know while I was gone, I know that you all did a role play. would it be helpful to have a role play between the soliciting feedback conversation? Do you have enough to go on as actors? Do you think that would be interesting?
I'm game.
Sure.
Can we start there with, well, Kim, you had your initial go-to question, so I'll let you, based on what we were just talking about, whichever go-to question is most on your mind right now, and see how that works with Jason. So Jason, you'll play the role of our tenured employee who is overwhelmed by the growth, and Kim, you are our overwhelmed in a ruinous empathy rut writer.
I'm stuck in ruinous empathy and getting so pissed that I'm headed straight for obnoxious aggression. That's where
a freight train to obnoxious aggression.
I don't know if that's how this writer felt, but that's how I would feel in this.
We went from pissed at lying to feelings of overwhelm, arrived home in tears. So there's a lot.
Yes. Okay. And in this conversation, I'm going to both solicit feedback from me, but also ask what happened about the lie. I'm not going to give feedback. I think you lied, but I'm going to ask a question. Is that okay? Amy, am I playing
Sounds
the game?
Great. Oh, I'm on pins and needles. Yeah. I want to see how it goes.
All right, here we go. Hey, Jason, how you doing? I'm glad that we're going to get a chance to take a walk.
Me too. I'm feeling pretty overwhelmed still.
I'm sorry to hear that. My first question is, what could I do? What do you need me to do or stop doing that would help with the overwhelm? I feel like I have not been helpful to you in the overwhelm.
Well, I feel like I have a way of doing my work, and that way works pretty well for me. And I know that you want me to change it, but it's complicated to change it, and I don't know that it's making anything better. So I feel like I'm changing a bunch of stuff. It's making it harder for me to do my work, but I'm not actually convinced that it makes it better for the rest of the team.
Okay, so let's put a pin in that. I want to talk more about that. But one of the things that I think is important working with the team is when you're leading a project to show up for a meeting. And we had this meeting. I know that it was sent to your calendar, but then you weren't at the meeting. So what happened there?
I honestly don't know. I mean, I never saw the meeting on my calendar. It might have come into my inbox at some point, but it never made it onto my calendar.
Do meetings for me on my calendar, when someone sends me a meeting, it shows up on my calendar automatically. And then I either accept it or reject it or delete it. Do you have a different setup with your calendar? Don't they automatically? I think we're using Google Calendar and they automatically go there as far as I know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. It just wasn't there for whatever reason.
Do you think you accidentally deleted it?
I guess it's possible, but not to my knowledge.
Okay, so this is a real problem because if we're working as a team and you're leading a meeting, you're leading a project, and then there's a meeting, it is very frustrating for the team if you don't show up. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I mean, if I were in their position, I'd be frustrated. Okay,
so what can we do to make sure? I want to come back to the changes that I think we need to make. But I think there's one thing we agree with, which is that when you're leading a project, you need to show up to lead the meeting. And so what can we do to make sure that this doesn't happen again? Because it felt like kind of a big FU to me and to the team. I was mad. The team was mad. I understand you're feeling overwhelmed. I think we all felt overwhelmed in that situation.
Well, I mean, maybe the simplest thing to do is to have me set up the meetings for my project instead of having you do it.
Okay. And you'll invite me to those as well?
Sure.
All right, let's do that. All right, let's time out. All right, what do you all think? Jason, you're good.
Jason is so good. I have to say, I was so irritated with you, Kim, when you put the pin in it. I was like, I'll tell you where to put a pin in it. I was on.
Okay, so that was a misstep on me.
No, I mean, it was it was so interesting to observe because we do this exercise where we do these practices. And one of the things we'll say is, you can go in all the different quadrants during a conversation. So I felt like you were really direct when you were talking about the calendar and you brought it back there. But there was something about the pin in it. And I mean, I was joking, but I think there's something interesting here around when you have two different things you want to accomplish in the conversation, which is actually how you were starting with it, which is that you wanted to see how they were doing and sort of solicit feedback, but you also were curious what was happening with the meeting. And so what I felt was actually the resentment about not being at the meeting and the checking in. It didn't feel as authentic to me because what you really wanted to get to was about the meeting. But as you were saying it, how did that feel for you?
So here's why I said, let's put a pin in it. What Jason was saying is the reason I'm stressed out is that you're not doing it my way. You want to do it your way. And that was a bigger conversation. I couldn't agree with that feedback. And I wanted to have the conversation. But I didn't think we could even have that conversation unless Jason agreed to lead meetings and to show up for them. So that was why I said, let's put a pin in it. If it was a real conversation, we wouldn't have paused. I would have come back to it.
To your point, if it wasn't a role play, I think we probably could have kept going. I think if I was playing it the way that this is written, at some point in that conversation, I would have burst into tears. Like I think if I was really playing the role the way this email was written to us, like it would have been very emotional, that conversation. And I was like relatively I was playing it relatively dispassionately. I was standoffish, like I wasn't giving you very much. And I was like blaming you for a lot of things, which I think is true to the story that we were given. But I do think that in the character that I was playing, at the heart of it was, I feel like this person is coming in and changing everything that we do. I don't trust them. I feel like it hasn't even been made clear to me why the way that I'm approaching it is wrong. And so why would I agree to change everything? And so I heard the put a pin in it in the context of the role play and not the actual conversation. Like I was thinking of it as like, well, that's like a long thing to try to piece apart. But I do think that's why the soliciting feedback guidance is so important, because if I played it correctly, the real conversation is, I don't believe in the way that you are, like the direction you're taking the team.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I heard you saying that, Jason, when you said, if I'm running a project, let me schedule the meeting. Like that felt like the sort of core thing that this person is stepping on their autonomy.
Yep.
Kim, what were you saying?
I think that is the conversation that really needed to be had. But I don't think, if I were in that manager's shoes, I don't think I could have had that conversation thinking this person had lied. Yep. So maybe it was, maybe I'm giving bad advice to say, go back to the order of operations and solicit feedback. Because if you think someone has lied to you, that's probably not the moment to solicit feedback. So this role play was very helpful. I gave bad advice. You got to get back to. Go ahead, Jason.
Just to build on what you're saying, I think you have. It's sort of like an all or nothing. Another way potentially to play that moment would be to say, I don't think I agree with you, but I want to hear you out about why you think that I'm taking things in the wrong direction. Yeah, I think you could have given me some space to share, like
why.
And I think in this relationship, at least the way it's been described, like part of the problem is that the manager is taking on too much of the responsibility for the work, for the emotional labor. Like this person is taking on all the things. Yeah. And so in a conversation, I think finding an opportunity, and that's why I was like tapping into the wisdom of others was on my mind. Cause I'm like, I'm clearly approaching this in the wrong way. Someone's worked with this person for 10 years. Someone has to know how to have a conversation with them that doesn't end with everybody, crying and me crying. You know what I'm saying? They're crying and then I'm crying in the car on the way home. Like, and if that's not the case, meaning like if they're like, oh yeah, like just you wait, like the tears are step one. Like step two is like, you're getting BCC'd on emails where you're being dragged through the, you know what I'm saying? Like who knows like what might come after that.
What else is going to happen?
But creating that space for the other person to pick up the baton a little bit, but contain it. So instead of making it like, how are we going to solve this like real world problem? How are we going to solve how are you going to manage this project? I think saying, I hear you have
okay,
doubts
so I'm
about
just
the
going to
direction.
jump in just because I am having a lot of fun. Jason, can we just switch real quick? You say what you're going to say, and Kim,
Sure.
now you are the longtime employee on the verge.
I'm going to take Kim's advice to the extreme. That's going to be my goal in this.
Okay.
I'm going to lean into the soliciting feedback thing.
Okay. And Kim, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Hey Kim, how's it going?
I'm stressed.
Yeah, I'm glad you told me, because certainly the last few conversations, I think I've noticed that you're stressed, and they've also left me pretty stressed. And I want to try to get to the bottom of that. And I think one of the mistakes that I've made so far is I haven't given you an opportunity to tell me what I might be doing that is leading to you feeling so stressed. And I'm here to listen. Help me understand. What are the things that I'm doing that you'd like me to stop doing or do differently to help make this less stressful for you?
Well, the thing thank you for asking. The thing that is really worrying me is that the changes you're making, automating the way that we offer customer support, is resulting in really poor customer satisfaction. Our NPS score is tanking. And what I am having to do is do the automation and do the manual emails. And nobody else is doing the manual emails. So it's all falling on me. And, I really care about our customers, and I care when they're unhappy. And all of these changes are ruining our ability to have a good relationship with our customers. And I don't feel like anyone else except for me cares about it. So I feel like it's all on my shoulders. And I feel like you also came in and you started changing a bunch of things. You didn't ask any questions. And you're changing some things that you don't know the implications. And I am really worried about what's going to happen to this company.
It's hard to hear that you're so frustrated with all the decisions that I've made and the things I put into place. But I'm honestly glad to know that you really care about our clients and doing a great job for our customers, because I want to tell you, I know I haven't proven it to you yet, but I want to tell you that I care about that as well.
It's not, Jason, it's not just the decisions you've made. It's that you have not asked people who've been here for a long time to have input. You just came in and you started changing things, from my perspective, willy-nilly. So not only am I worried about our customers, frankly, I feel disrespected.
Yeah, I was picking up on that. That I think I'm glad you gave me an opportunity to address this in particular, because I want to share my perspective. This is not an excuse, but I want to share how I experienced coming into the company. From my perspective, I was asking for input, and I was asking for advice from people,
but not from me. You never asked me.
I'm hearing you say that. That's not how it felt to me, but I'm hearing you say that. And it's important to me to know that the attempts that I've made to ask for your input have not come across, have not felt like I was earnestly or I was not authentically seeking your input. And I see that as a problem.
Sorry to interrupt, but for example, when I said, let's add the NPS score to the dashboard so we can see the impact that these changes that you're making are having on our net promoter score, you just dismissed that out of hand. Like, why did you do that? Why don't you want to? Do you not care about our NPS score?
It's funny that you bring up that example, because I had a conversation with the engineer who's working with us on that dashboard, and he had told me that it was going to be really difficult in the short term to add that. And what was going through my head... But I've
been looking at it. I look at it every single day.
Yes. And in the moment when we were having the conversation about adding the NPS score to the dashboard, what I was responding to was that specifically was going to be challenging. But I hear you saying that it felt like I dismissed the idea out of hand, that we shouldn't be worrying about the NPS score. That was definitely not my intent. I watched the NPS score as well. And I know.
Why are you continuing to make these changes? Don't you see it tanking like I do?
Should we pause here?
I am making it difficult.
You're making it really tough. So, Kim, as the observer, I felt like Jason really acknowledged and validated what was happening for you at the same time that he was pushing back a little bit. How did it feel for you? Did you feel heard?
I wasn't ready to make nice.
Yep.
I did feel heard, but I wasn't ready to make nice.
Yeah. I think that's totally okay. Like, that's how I would expect the conversation to go if you solicit feedback from this person.
Yeah.
And so I was like, look, at least we're talking. You're telling me what's on your mind. I'm telling you what's on my mind. Like, we're having an actual human conversation.
Yeah.
And it has not yet devolved into tears. So I'm like, win. We're doing something.
Something good is happening.
Well, the reason why I think it was so great to do this practice is because often what happens when there's the practice is it does devolve into tears and then ultimately you're fired, right? Like, that's sort of the outcome is people feel like, I don't know what to say because they keep talking about the NPS score, which, by the way, Kim, I thought that was a lovely detail to
make
throw
up
in.
and throw
it. It was great. I loved it.
You know, what I just want to call out that I observed that I think is helpful to notice is that, Jason, I did feel like you were acknowledging what Kim was saying. It wasn't placating. It was a real earnest acknowledgement. And you also shared your own perspective. And there was one moment where Kim was saying how, you know, you come in guns blazing and you're making all these changes and it really sucks for me. And I'm just curious, Jason, you did say, well, from my perspective, this is how it's landed. When there is a power differential, when you're the manager, how much of but from my side, you know, you've been this and this, and like, what do you feel like is too much of from my perspective, in terms of your own emotional frustration with that response?
What was going through my head in that moment was that it was two things I wanted to say, which was I perceived it differently, and I acknowledged that you did not perceive it that way, which I accept as a problem that is for me to solve. Like, I owe it to you for you to feel like I am really getting input from you. And if what I've done so far is insufficient, there's something more that I can do. And I think Kim very expertly changed the subject at that moment before like any real insight that could be arrived at, which is my experience of these charged conversations. Exactly.
Yeah.
But that was like top of my to-do list, is to come back to how can I make sure that I am getting the input from you that is going to help me make better changes, both for you and for the company. Like, that was my that was the iceberg that we were like, that I was hopefully floating toward to try to land on. I guess what I would say is, I think that if it wasn't such an equal exchange, if Kim wasn't such a good partner in that conversation, and instead she chose to sort of like shut down in response to that, then I would have changed tacks. I think that what I perceived is, like, when I shared my perspective, that was an encouragement to Kim and her character to restate her opinion more strongly, or add another detail, or give me something else. And so I saw it as like, okay, this is actually helpful. Like, when I say how I feel, Kim is willing to tell me that she disagrees strongly with that feeling. And that to me is like, we're communicating, like I'm learning something. And it's okay for me to be wrong, at least in the sort of container of this conversation. That doesn't mean I'm going to give up on the idea of automation in this example. Like, it still may be absolutely necessary, because the thing that wasn't in the discussion that might have to be there in some future iteration is, we can't afford to continue to grow and not automate this. Those two things are incongruous with each other, meaning like the company won't survive a failure to automate customer support, right? It's like, that's my responsibility and what's in my head. I have a job to do to save both your job and the jobs of everybody else on this team, is to make sure that this transition to a more orderly and automated way of doing customer service actually happens. Like, we would get there eventually, but I don't think we were going to get there soon.
Hey, sorry, can I interject? I know I said I wasn't going to be on this podcast, but I have a question for Jason. Hi, I'm Brandy, the producer, the Radical Candor podcast. I think everything you're saying is great, Jason, and I wonder how many years it took you of being a manager to get that emotional detachment, because for someone who's brand new, I can see there being a lot of emotions muddled up with not taking that personally. And I know we don't say don't take it personally, but how do you not go home and cry? Well, what kind of armor do you put on to have these conversations?
I might go home and cry. Yeah. I wouldn't take that off the table. I think there's a difference. The way that I see that is like the most helpful thing in preparation for that conversation was what I said immediately before it started, which is I'm going to lean all the way into Kim's advice, which is like solicit feedback. Do not walk out of this conversation without feeling like you've really heard from this person. And I think that it's that was my anchor in the conversation, which is I'm going to try to find ways to get more information from this person. And that's really useful. That gives me a little bit of emotional detachment because it's like, well, that didn't work. Let me try something else. Or like, this is really working. Let me try that. And like, I'll try something like that again. I don't want to say I made it into a game in my head, but I have done that, like a similar process like that, where I have sort of like a mantra, an idea, a sort of guiding principle for a conversation. And I give myself permission not to like fully invest in the like catastrophe that is like human interaction, but instead just try to stay focused on a particular objective that's open-ended enough that it could take a 45, it could lead us to a 45-minute conversation.
And I think the other thing, when I made the mistake of saying put a pin in it, I think part of what was going through my head is I would not be able to really solicit the feedback until I got the lie off the table. Because for me, when someone lies to me, it's such a betrayal of trust. And if I think someone may have lied, I have to resolve that before I could actually go back.
So this is really interesting, Kim, because just to go back to Brandy, what you were bringing in, I felt like Jason's point, like, hey, this conversation was a real win because I got, my goal was to open the communication and actually hear from that person. So I think that's a really important takeaway for these kinds of challenging relationships, that we're not going to solve it all in a conversation, but that you actually got some communication from Kim in this case. But Kim, are you saying that rather than Jason's soliciting feedback about sort of that, what's one way that, I'm contributing to your overwhelm or stress, et cetera, are you saying you would want to ask what happened with the Google meeting? Like, is that the question that you want to ask?
Yeah. No, in an ideal world, which this is not, I would be able to put my emotions about thinking I had been lied to the side and do what Jason did and solicit feedback. But as I entered the role play, I'm like, I can't solicit feedback until I know what went on with the lie. And I think also, by the way, one of the things that I've been thinking about lately is that I'm perhaps a little bit too self-righteous about lying. And that sometimes people do lie. And it doesn't mean that they are liars, but it means that they lied in that situation. And so I've been trying lately to be, not to have such an emotional response to thinking that someone might have lied to me. Because it's not like I'm perfectly honest. I lie to people sometimes.
I think
now I want to put a pin in that and have a follow-up podcast on that conversation.
I will tell. You want to know what went through my mind?
Yes, I do.
I told a lie. We were on a call. And Brandy asked me if I had been playing 2048. And I lied and I said I had not been playing, but I had been playing, but I was ashamed that I had played. This happened like a long time ago, but every time I think about it, I feel ashamed. So now I feel a little better. Thank you for allowing me to confess.
I'm so glad. Thank you for sharing. I wish I want to just end right here, but I know, Jason, you have something to...
No. I think I was actually going to take us to this part of the conversation. I honestly think this is the sausage factory. of like human emotion and like the baggage we bring to the conversation. We are like on the floor of the sausage factory right now. And it is messy. I think the reason why I appreciate the guidance that's in Radical Candor is not because it makes it so that it's really easy to navigate your way out of every mess, but it gives you a way to think about where you might have gone wrong and some options, like pathways to like find like try something different the next time you go in. What I feel like we're coming to is for this person is, first of all, be ready to build some self-awareness. If you really want a relationship with this person, you got to get their perspective. There's no way around it. Like you need to know what they think. You can ask for some help, right? Like from other people, but don't expect the conversation to resolve itself. You are already you're frustrated, you're emotional, you feel like you've been lied to. You're part of the mess, but you're also like a key part of the solution. So like have some patience with yourself and with these conversations. Give yourself some space to actually see where you can get with the other person, but don't expect them to be beautiful.
As we were doing the role plays, the story what you want me to tell us the story from my career that was going through my head, because it may be relevant for this person to hear it. Or am I doing the thing where I'm inserting myself into someone else's story? Okay.
Take us through the sausage factory.
So when I first joined Google, and I think I may have told this story before, but when I first joined Google, I had 5 managers, and in 1 week, 3 of them quit. 3 of them left my team and joined other teams. And I was terrified. I thought I was going to be fired. I was frustrated. And Google had this rule that employees could just leave managers' teams. They didn't even have to talk to the manager. So that was their way of sort of dealing with power indifference. So it was basically what had happened is I got there and the team was a hot mess. It was like a child soccer game of 100 people, everybody chasing the ball, and so it was very clear to me what had to happen. We had to divide into these 5 different teams, each of which was responsible for something different, and there were metrics. And so I just did this. I said, here's how we're going to organize. I didn't ask anybody's perspective. I just jumped into implementing my ideas in the GSD wheel. I didn't take the time to listen to people. I didn't take the time to help them clarify their ideas. I didn't take the time to have debates. I just grabbed the decisions and started implementing them. And as a result, people were pissed off and they left. That was a big lesson for me. So I think that one of the things that might be helpful is to go back to soliciting feedback, but also to make sure you're listening. I mean, this person has been there a long time, has some sort of history that might be useful to know, that might make their behavior seem more understandable. And the manager who wrote in is probably right about what they're doing. I mean, I think I was right that we did need to break down into 5 teams of 20 each with the leader and metrics. But how you get there with the new team is really important.
Yeah. I just want to build on that, Kim. I think it's so important. I will often share how I was at one organization, had been working on a project for years and years and years, and a new project owner came on board and said, they've got the solution to the problem, which, of course, at that point, I've been trying to solve for years and years and years, and you sort of give up a little bit. And it was a frustrating experience, but what it taught me was that when I went to a new company, rather than coming in the guns blazing and why are you doing it this way, really trying to understand why are you doing it right? Yeah. Like there's a lot of wisdom there. And I think that humility, which can be often so hardly earned, just to amplify your point, is a big one. Before we close, Jason, as you think about the conversation that you were just having with Kim and noting that there might be some emotion and that your goal was to really stay focused on the primary purpose of this conversation, which was to get this person to communicate. What's important for you for the close of that conversation? Because there's, as you said, there's going to be multiple conversations here, perhaps. How do you want to close it so that, at the far end, the person doesn't think they're getting fired, whether they can or can't, but that there's a spirit of ongoing collaboration, especially since, as you said, that person might be feeling very frustrated?
I think simply acknowledging that that there's a very big, sort of difference of perception or opinion here, and it's going to take us more than one conversation to try to work it out. Like just stating it as a fact is probably taking you a long way in the right direction. The other thing that I was thinking about was to say how much you value, to say like, this was really helpful for me. I feel like I got to learn something about how you see things, Kim. And that's like, and I can validate that I didn't hear all of these opinions up until now. So if we can keep having these conversations, I think I'm going to I'll learn a lot from you. And I think it's tempting. I mean, unless there's like a reason to rush to a decision, like this person can't possibly work on this team. I think if you have someone, especially with tenure, that you can have multiple conversations with to say like, what are all the mistakes that people before me made? You know what I'm saying? Like there's lots of opportunities to learn from. Then give yourself some time and space to have those conversations. And as long as the other person is game, I think in a situation not entirely dissimilar from this, I wasn't new to the team, but I had a person become very frustrated with the way that I was approaching something. And essentially they came to me and said, look, I don't think I can continue to work on the team the way that it's structured, the way that you're planning to do things. And I said, that would be very disappointing to me. Like, I like working with you. I want to see if there's some, like, reverse the role. I want to see if there's some way for us to save this. Like, I think you're great. I'd like to keep you if at all possible. And I think the best way to do that is to have some conversations like the ones we were just describing, where I'm soliciting feedback from you about ways that I could be doing things differently. And through that conversation, we ultimately reached the conclusion, like, it was a bad result for me and for the company because this person was very well liked, but they said, look, I can't stay. And I said, I can't keep you. Like, I wish I could change things to make it so that it would work, but it's not going to work.
Yeah. Like at a certain point, there may be a fundamental disagreement about how to do things. And at a certain point, you have to listen, challenge, commit. You can't argue endlessly. But I will say that you do need to spend some time. You need to argue a little bit. Yeah. And I think one of the challenges, especially of being a new manager, and the mistake I made at Google was I thought, I'm the boss, I'm the decider, y'all just get in line and do what I say. And that is telling people what to do doesn't work. And
correct. I challenge, you commit. Yeah.
And I think it is also it's so hard not to get your ego involved. When someone who's working for you doesn't do what you're telling them to do, it is really hard not to go down a deep spiral of, I'm going to tell you what, and if you don't do it, I'm going to fire you. And that just doesn't work very well. In fact, it leads to terrible results. And so making sure to remember that your ego is not your friend in this situation. And that when you become the boss, your ego is likely to grab your brain and take it into a not good place, make it hard for you to listen.
Now it's time for our Radical Candor checklist. Tips you can use to start putting radical candor into practice.
Tip number 1, remember the radical candor order of operations. Get it, give it, gauge it, encourage it. Practicing the steps in this order is important. You have to start by asking for feedback, which might mean you need to figure out how to check your own emotions, by the way, as I was unable to do in the role play. When you, as a manager, start making changes that feel small, your team may experience those changes as unsettling chaos with unintended consequences. But you don't know unless you ask.
Tip number 2, when it comes to these difficult conversations, it's so important to not only have patience and space for the folks that you are having the conversation with, but also for yourself. You're definitely part of the challenge. You need some self-awareness, but you're also a big part of the solution. And don't hesitate to ask for help from other people. Maybe even more important, don't put the pressure on yourself of expecting a difficult situation to resolve itself immediately. Try seeking out little wins. Start, as Jason did in the role play, by getting the perspective of the person you're having the difficult or challenging relationship with.
Tip number 3, use your one-on-one meetings to have career conversations or future-focused conversations with your employees. If you're a new manager on a well-established team, It's important to assure them that you're actually curious about their goals, career and otherwise, dreams, etc., and you're not gathering information to use against them, but instead to help them take a step in the direction of those dreams.
Tip number 4, your ego is not your amigo. When you become the boss, your ego can hijack your brain and take you to a bad place. So make sure you're truly open to hearing from this person before you start to give radical candor. We never really, by the way, I know we're doing the tips, but I want to acknowledge that we never really got to suggesting to this person how to say what was on their mind. We never got to giving criticism. But I think that's the whole point of this episode is you got to start by soliciting it.
We'll put a pin on it.
Put a pin in it. Sorry.
In it, on it. I think it was, did I say on it? In it. Yeah, we'll have a follow-up. And for more tips, go to radicalcandor.com/resources, download our free learning guides. You can sign up for Radical Candor on Masterclass, get our lit video book, register for our workplace comedy series, The Feedback Loop, and more. Show notes for this episode, go to radicalcandor.com/podcast. Praise in public and private, criticize in private. If you like what you hear, you can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Criticism for us, email it to podcast@radicalcandor.com. Thanks also to folks that write in with these challenging situations. For the writer of today's situation, again, we so feel your care. This question resonated with each of us, so thank you for helping us get better. Bye for now.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks for joining us. Our podcast features Radical Candor co-founders Kim Scott and Jason Rosoff, is produced by our Director of Content, Brandy Neal, and hosted by me, Amy Sandler. Music is by Cliff Goldmacher. Go ahead and follow us on Twitter @Candor and find us online at radicalcandor.com.